Hi everyone, I'm Dana Lewis, and I get to present the AID IRL study, which stands for Automated Insulin Delivery in Real Life. And the goal of this study, which was funded by DiabetesMine, was really to do a qualitative deep dive into the real-world impact of some of the world's first commercial systems. I was able to do semi-structured phone interviews with 7 users of commercial AID systems, 4 who use Control-IQ, 2 who use the 670G, and 1 who's using the CAM APS FX system. I took the responses I got from the interviews and categorized them into each of these different categories and topics of interest, ranging from the training and setup experience and their learning curve, time and range, hypoglycemia, quality of life, the impact on their sleep, their requirements around troubleshooting and keeping the system up and running, and whether or not their expectations were met. And I'll walk you through some responses from each of the users from each of the systems in all of these categories. The first user I got to speak with was actually a parent of a child with type 1 diabetes who previously did a 5-day study with the Control-IQ back in October, but switched onto the system off-label in January when it first became commercially available. And you can see from the green check marks all the way down, they had a fairly positive experience, and they saw an overall 30% time and range increase with no change or increase to hypoglycemia. And they found that they're doing less aggressive corrections and manual troubleshooting with the system. If they have to do any manual corrections, it tends to be related to post-meal times. And overall, they felt like having good settings and being familiar with pumping going into using Control-IQ really made a difference in their positive experience with the system. Quality of life, they thought it made a huge impact for them. The parent said that they felt like in the first 90 days of using Control-IQ, they've thought about diabetes less than any other time in 3.5 years of living with type 1 diabetes. And they were getting solid, uninterrupted sleep for the first time since they were diagnosed. There are a couple of frustrations that were mentioned by this family. One was the lack of ability to remotely bolus the child from an opposite phone, and also remote monitoring on a phone to be able to see all the information about insulin dosing from the system on the phone. There are minor things like being frustrated, like we all are, with the 2-hour warm-up on the CGM because you can't use the automated insulin delivery system while the CGM isn't running. And they noted that growth spurt hormones were dealt with fairly well with the system, but post-meal was really the time where they felt like they had to do additional manual corrections. The second user I got to talk to is an adult male who previously was using pump and CGM and DIY automated insulin delivery systems as well. Overall, he actually saw a decrease in his time in range, which was a little bit surprising, but when I probed into the numbers, his overall time in range with the commercial system was on par with all of the other commercial AID users. In general, he was really pleased with the ease of use of the commercial system and the convenience of having it be all in one device and not have to deal with carrying additional equipment like he was using with DIY. He talked about it's just me and my pump, and I love that, other than the decreased overall time in range that he had. Another kind of core common frustration he had was breakfast time as a particular meal. He actually stopped eating breakfast while on Control-IQ, whereas he was eating breakfast before with his DIY system. He also felt like the system didn't keep up well when he was sick, and he felt like he ran high for an entire week when he was sick compared to what he experienced when sick on DIY closed-loop systems. He too talked about more manual interventions, mostly related to meal times, and frustration with the 2-hour gap in CGM and automated insulin delivery as a result. The third Control-IQ user I got to speak with is actually an adult female with LADA, so she's still producing her own insulin. And she previously was using the Basal-IQ for hypo protection. She actually didn't like Control-IQ at first, and she turned it off after 2 weeks of use. And it really took some coaching and support from other members of the diabetes community online that convinced her to try again. So she restarted Control-IQ with significantly increased settings for her, and she was able to succeed in getting the glycemic control that she wanted with the system. She's getting about the same time and range that she was before using Basal-IQ, but note, because she's producing her own insulin, she's not entering carbs into the system or receiving any boluses for it. Overall, she's very, very happy with the peace of mind that she gets with the system. She says she sleeps a lot better knowing that it's preventing hypoglycemia, but that in turn can be a point of frustration because she'd like to be able to turn off the hyperglycemia corrections and still be able to keep that hypo protection, which she's not able to do. She feels like the hard-coded target in the system is too high for where she would like her glycemic control to be. And so she would like the ability to change the target and still have the hypo protection, and doesn't like that she has to change her settings to be super aggressive in order to get the control that she wants. And because she's also producing her own insulin, she struggles with actually looking back and seeing for any given hour how much insulin was actually dosed as an idea of where her body is and how much insulin she needs at any given point in time. The last Control-IQ user I spoke with is also an adult female with type 1 diabetes, also experienced with pump and CGM, but she noted that she frequently has to take steroids, which can cause higher blood sugar levels. But overall, Control-IQ is dealing well with that for her. She says she hits more time in range at night, and overall an increase in 70% for her time in range, with no additional lows caused by the system. And she feels like it does a pretty good job keeping up with the steroid-induced blood glucose levels that would otherwise be elevated, and she's not having to correct as often manually as she would have before she switched on to Control-IQ. But she too wants to be able to adjust the target and run tighter to get different glycemic control than she is with the system. She actually chooses not to run with sleep mode on because she wants the boluses for hyperglycemia correction. And she also has quite a bit of dawn phenomenon impacted her blood sugar levels, and so she wants to keep sleep mode off and get bolus corrections all the time. Now, switching to 670G, the first user I got to talk with is an adult male who spent a year on CGM before switching to his very first pump about 3 months before he then switched on to the 670G. But he's been using it for 3 years, so he's a longtime user of this system. And he doesn't remember seeing a big change in A1C, doesn't remember seeing changes in his time in range, doesn't see an increase to hypoglycemia, so that's all really positive feedback from him. He also talked about its ability to keep up with him exercising and using the higher activity mode to deal with ups and downs from activity when he's really, really active. Overall with the system, he felt like the learning curve was easy if you already understood CGM calibration. But he was pretty frustrated by CGM calibration, and that was a theme that came up in our conversation. He's woken up overnight once to twice a week to calibrate the CGM and feels like he's struggling with CGM calibration 3 or more times a week, which seemed pretty significant compared to the other systems. He too talked about post-meal highs being the biggest glycemic management issue for him, especially if he was missed a bolus or was delayed in giving his meal bolus or underestimated his carbs. And he also, like the previous Control-IQ users, wants to still be able to have hypoglycemia protection if he turns off high corrections. So if he gets kicked out of auto mode by a lack of CGM calibration, he still wants to be able to protect against hypoglycemia. And he was frustrated by the amount of time it took to charge the CGM that went with the 670G system. The other 670G user I spoke with is also an adult male, but had very, very high insulin needs that were actually able to come down quite a bit in using the 670G system. But I'll note that he was one of the users who was very new to CGM, as well as automated insulin delivery, and that seemed to color his experience quite a bit. He had increased time in range, less hypoglycemia, less insulin used, thought the learning curve was relatively easy, but he talked about the number of alerts and alarms he gets on his pump every single day and being woken up every other night to deal with a blood glucose alarm being out of range or having to calibrate his CGM. Now, he was one of the people, because of the timing of going on the 670G, he actually switched from an in-person training to an online virtual training for learning the 670G. And he said it wasn't problematic and didn't really influence his learning curve, but he did wish that he could have done in-person training with the trainer beside him, walking through all of the menus on the pump. Now, the last user is Kim APS FX, which again is a system that's not yet approved in the US, but it became available during the study. So I wanted to talk to a user to get some comparison about how that system works compared to the others that are more well known. I got to speak with an adult male who has type 1, has been a long time on pump and CGM, and also a long-time DIY user. And interestingly, this user got no difference in time and range from the DIY system overall, and thought the learning curve was relatively easy, although he noted that it has to learn you, and you have to learn the system. And this system seems to have more temporary targets and the ability to adjust it, which he thought was relatively positive, but he does miss the ability from the DIY systems to actually be able to pre-schedule those target adjustments in advance. But he did note, although he had the same time and range, he had increased hypoglycemia, what he called too much. When I asked him what that was, he said it was 7%, less than 70, which is almost 2 times the amount of hypoglycemia he was having before with his DIY setup. He was also frustrated by the lack of visibility into the insulin on board levels so that he would know when and how and what to do related to exercise, and he said that made it really challenging. He also pointed out that because the system does learn you, it might be better for people who have a more regular routine schedule. People who have a very varying daily schedule may struggle if the system learns something that's not necessarily true for that day's schedule. He also thought that the alarms would impact his sleep if he wasn't using a second phone as kind of a DIY workaround for dealing with the alarms, because he found the alarms in the app itself from the AID system to be relatively frustrating. Now, overall, some universal themes that I heard from these interviews was that most people had the same or increased time in range and were very pleased with the glycemic outcomes. There were some individuals who had increased hypoglycemia, although that did not seem to be the majority. Most people, they had the same level or decreased their hypoglycemia. But in terms of where glycemic management seems to need some improvements for this technology, post-meal, post-prandial time seems to be the biggest impact for 670G, Control-IQ, and CAM-APS. The other thing that I really heard is that people who were newer to CGM seem to have a different learning curve in addition to the AID systems itself. And so people with a new CGM experience may be struggling with the CGM as much as the automated insulin delivery system. In particular, I heard a lot from the 670G users about frustrations with troubleshooting and connecting with the CGM or keeping it calibrated, which was not only a daily in the daytime troubleshooting and frustration issue, but it also did impact both users' sleep. Now, overall, I tried to pull out some of the insights from some of the newer users to the systems. The first person I talked to, the family who's using Control-IQ, they had been lurking in the DIY community. And so they had previous insight about settings and how these systems worked from the community. And they also previously participated in a 5-day study of the same technology that they switched onto, which they thought helped with their experience. The adult female with LADA, who's producing her own insulin, really struggled with the system and really figuring out how to make it work for her. And so because she had to stop and start and change her settings so much, she categorized her learning curve as relatively high. And she was really the main user who talked about the learning curve being high as a result of her different insulin needs. And again, CGM calibration seemed to be challenging. So one of the new 670G users really struggled with CGM calibration, even though he said his previous pump experience really helped him feel comfortable with the automated insulin delivery system overall. And two pieces of feedback that I'll emphasize coming from people who previously used a DIY automated insulin delivery system. Both of them loved the convenience factor of the commercial all-in-one system and thought that was done really, really well. But the Control-IQ user who previously used DIY systems actually stopped eating breakfast and still doesn't eat breakfast, which he did before on his previous DIY system. Vice versa, on the CAM-APS system, he was actually pleasantly surprised with how the system performed compared to his overall experience with DIY, despite the increased hypoglycemia. Now, some overall notes. I think it's really important for companies to be thinking about the onboarding experience for people's previous diabetes tech experience. So what I heard was that the new user experience for somebody who's new to CGM and automated insulin delivery was a little bit different than somebody who was just switching but had prior CGM experience when switching to automated insulin delivery. Most users seem to want to have better, more upfront displays of insulin on board and the ability to change temporarily or permanently the targets that the system was aiming for to keep them in glycemic range. Many users also mentioned that they want to be able to still have hypoglycemic protection even if they turn off the high corrections or hyperglycemic corrections, which most systems don't seem to be able to do. And postprandial, meal times, that seems to be an area where the algorithms can improve on glycemic control. And there's also usability features like the ability to remotely bolus or remotely monitor from a different device. That was something that families, as well as adults living with diabetes, wanted to have as well. Now, overall, I primarily asked about time and range, but I started to probe in the interviews about the number of manual interventions that people were doing in order to get their mostly positive outcomes. And I was a little bit surprised that 2 to 3 times a day, people outside of meal times are still having to correct and manually intervene with their system. And that seems fairly high to me, so that's probably another area where these algorithms can further improve. So these systems are hybrid closed loops, they're not fully automated, and so one thing I learned from this is that with the commercial systems, individuals are still having to take frequent action throughout the day with it. And again, I want to emphasize that people who are newer to CGM seem to have a different learning curve, and that's something that should be addressed by the companies. Now, overall, there are of course limitations to any study. I recruited people based on them talking on social media about their use of these systems, positive or negative, and I was primarily recruiting people who had talked on Twitter or Instagram about their experience. I did attempt to get a mix of people who were new to the system and more recent on their learning curve, as well as longer time users, but because these systems are very new in some cases, there's of course a recency bias there, and the number of users I was able to get with a longer term history of use of that automated insulin delivery system. And also, of course, with any study, there's recall and recency bias for what things are most recent and top of mind for people with their use of this technology. And I also think that there's a status quo bias. with insurance and healthcare and the way it's set up, particularly in the US, where people may want to try other systems to be able to compare them, but we don't really have an easy way to do that. So for the most part, only DIY users had different systems to compare against in their experience. Now, I'm thrilled I get to actually bring up several panelists to talk about the real-world impact of their automated insulin delivery systems. You can use the Q&A feature on Remo to ask questions, which I will help shepherd into the panel. But if you have questions about the study, I'd love to talk about that too. So please use the chat feature for that, and I'll follow up after the panel, or post your questions on Twitter, and I'll follow up on Twitter. Thanks.